Hello and welcome to the first online episode of CIS1300. I apologize in advance for the poor audio, but I got to work with what I got right now, okay? So bear with me and let's get started talking about design and accessibility. All right, moving right ahead. Remember firstly that form follows function, right? And what do I mean by that? The form, the design, the layout, all that of your website should come secondary to the actual function of the website. So what the website does is deliver content to the end users, to potential end users. So you need to display that content, of course, in a meaningful way. But first you need to gather what that content is. So this cool graphic right here of somebody who designed some really awesome tires. They're the same width and height. They're colored very nicely. Unfortunately, because they weren't aware of the function of the tires to begin with, they are completely useless. They're square tires. They don't do anything. Right? So the first thing to do is gather up all the information of what your website is going to contain in it, what it's going to deliver to your end users. So I have a list of some common things. We're not going to go through everything in the list, but the first thing that you should be doing is actually typing up a list of all the content that goes in the website for a particular project, for a particular client. Type it, write it by hand, draw it out, put boxes around it, organize things into categories. It doesn't even necessarily have to be organized at first in the way that you want it to be on the website. You should just organize things into what makes sense to deliver to clients, potential clients. And then you can kind of streamline that and narrow it down and build it up so that it does make sense in a website. But you need to organize that information first. So my short list of some common things. Does your business, does the client have events? Are potential customers going to be scheduling appointments? Are they going to be booking time slots? Are they going to be buying tickets to the events? Or is the website simply going to display information about the events and there's not going to be any interactivity? There's just going to be information about the events. All those things are pretty common things, and all those need to be accounted for in the events area. And next, I've separated out featured news and regular news. The featured news, to me, is going to be these things that are not necessarily on the front page, but often you'll find them on the front page. Things that are separated out to be more important, more timely, more topical than regular news. And then the regular news, whether it's a blog, when I'm just putting a little more professional word on blog information, you can separate that out into categories as well. And those are all informational things. Those are stories, write-ups, that kind of thing. So informational. Then next is products. Is the website going to be an e-commerce website, or is it just going to be displaying information about the products? Visitors can find those products in stores on their own. Maybe there's a search for a store near you. Those are all things that kind of go around the products. The e-commerce side of things, it's got to be connected to an e-commerce for payment, for credit card processing. So PayPal is a pretty common one for small businesses for sure, but it's not the only one, not even for small businesses. There are a lot of others. So all that information goes into the product area. Often clients will want to sign up for a newsletter. Maybe I don't, but people do want newsletters of businesses that they care about, that they want more information about. So the newsletter sign up should be Like, very easy. Just sign up for a newsletter, put your email in here and press go, and you'll be added. On the flip side of that, you want to give you want to give your clients a way to get out of the newsletter. Is the only way to get out of the newsletter to reply to the newsletter, unsubscribe, or can they unsubscribe on your website? Or is there an unsubscribe button on all of the links on there that takes them to the website where they can unsubscribe? That's all part of the newsletter. Maybe your newsletter is always sent out through Constant Contact or MailChimp, and it gets that unsubscribe button automatically added, and it goes to the Constant Contact or the MailChimp area, and then it gets removed from the list. Secondary to that, if you are using a third-party newsletter mailing list, you need to make sure that you're exporting your list in some sort of timely fashion, in a timely manner, so that you're getting, when somebody says, hey, I want to be on the newsletter, it doesn't take 6 months or a year before you actually copy that over. You should hopefully be doing it every week or every month or something, depending on how often the newsletter goes out to begin with. The later things on here are pretty straightforward: general business info, contact, location, hours. Sometimes there's infographics that may or may not have to do with products or news or anything. You may have a separate area just for infographics. This is just kind of a secondary inclusion of mine. Services that a client provides may be a product as a service or service as a product, or it may just be some information about what services they provide, and somebody has to call a sales associate in order to get these services, or in order to set up a time to make an appointment to then have a salesperson talk to them about these services. Right? That all goes in the services area, and I have homepage in here at the end. Homepage of the site is perhaps one of the more unique pages on a site. Everybody who comes to your website will probably see the homepage, unless you have this massive site, and when they Google something, they go inside of the site and they never perchance get to the homepage. There are sites like that. Maybe Stack Overflow is one of the ones I can think of. Very rarely do I ever get to the homepage of that site, but I'm inside there fairly often. But your homepage is going to have content made up potentially of all these other content areas, and you're going to have to organize that somewhere in the homepage. And that's where we come in next, is the wireframe. We should start organizing these things into a wireframe. You can begin by organizing these in as simple as a way as cutting out little pieces of paper, little rectangles in that, fitting them into a page, drawing things by hand. You don't have to open up a computer right away and start working in Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign or whatever, or XD or whatever design tool you want to use. You don't have to use one at the first step, but once everything gets organized in some sort of text version, then you can start making boxes and playing around with things. This is the first kind of brainstorming step to actually the design and the layout. We're not worried about colors yet either, and that's why we're doing everything in grayscale at the moment. Colors are going to come later. Colors are probably going to be predetermined anyway by the client. They have a logo perhaps already. Not everybody does, but if they do have a logo, they probably have a color scheme already thought of, and you're just going to have to kind of go with their chosen color scheme already. So don't worry about color at this point. Just try and get everything to fit in the page. And the way we're going to make it fit in the page is first we're going to start thinking about the different sizes of screens. Okay, I think that I was mentioning in here, I forgot to talk about it. Some common mistakes that designers who are not web developers. So there's a lot of designers out there who are, they're great artists, they're great designers, they're print designers maybe, but they don't necessarily know how websites work internally. And so they can design some very nice designs that are difficult to translate from a Photoshop image to an actual working website. And so the designers and the developers have to work together in order to kind of streamline that, get that design working into something that can translate into the web. Maybe the designer can draw things that the developer just can't build. That's certainly a potential problem as well. If the developer is not as capable as the designer can draw, that's one common pitfall in there. Another common pitfall with some designers who don't have a lot of web design experience is they make a design and they forget or they don't do a very good job of designing for all of the different screen sizes. So when we are working with anything on the internet, now it's 2020, there's a lot of different screen sizes we have to take into consideration. And we're going to start with the smallest one first. We're always going to start with the smallest one first. The reason is twofold. One is the smaller devices, the phone has less physical space, of course, but what is really going on is phones are not quite as powerful as desktops. Right? Phones are getting faster and smarter every day, but so are desktops and laptops, and they're always going to have more power. So the phones are a little bit limited in their speed for power reasons and also for network reasons. Phones are portable. You're not always going to be on Wi-Fi. So you're going to have a little bit less download some of the time in a phone. So we're going to start designing on a phone because it has the lowest level of resources, both in terms of computer processing and a network, and also in terms of screen real estate. So we scroll websites vertically. We start at the top and we work our way down. So we have an infinite amount of vertical space to deal with, but we have a limited amount of horizontal space. No matter what your screen size is, you're always going to have a limited amount of horizontal space. Even if you have a giant 26-inch monitor, you're still going to have a limited amount of horizontal space because we're not scrolling horizontally. Maybe one day we will, and I'm sure somebody has made a horizontal scrolling website in the past. They're not that popular. People aren't going to jump to the conclusion that they have to scroll horizontally when they first get to a website. It's going to take them, you're going to have to tell them right up front, hey, this website scrolls horizontally. They won't get it. Not on their own, they won't. So we have limited horizontal space, unlimited vertical space. So we start with the phone and we just stack everything on top of itself. On top of each other, the header, with the logo, and then whatever content in there. So we are not going to have a layout that looks like we have here on a phone. No way. We're going to have to stack all that stuff. We're going to have to pare some of this down too. If any of these things are not necessary, if they're superfluous, like maybe this sidebar is extra stuff that we don't need on a mobile homepage, we're going to take that out. We're going to load that in later with JavaScript, and it's not even going to execute on the phone. That's going to save both speed and screen size with that one. That is partly the designer's choice, and then the developer has to figure out the best way to do it as well. Moving up to the next screen size is the tablet portrait and also the phone landscape. Those are around about the same size, give or take. There are big and small tablets and big and small phones, so there's some variability there, but they're around the same size, the tablet portrait and the phone landscape. Depending on the content of your site, you might not change very much at all here. Just like this example right here, they're pretty much exactly the same. The font size is different, so that on the phone, the font size is really large so you can see and read everything easily on that small screen. And on the tablet, the font size, relatively speaking, is a little bit smaller. Depending on how they're displayed, that's something that you're going to have to play around with. You're going to have to use a tablet and a phone and make sure that they are displayed the way that you want them to be in terms of font sizes. So moving to the next screen size is either going to be the tablet landscape or the laptop. So a landscape tablet and a smaller laptop are going to be pretty much the same size. Larger laptops are edging into the desktop screen size by that point, but small and medium sized laptops we have always going to be on Wi-Fi, fast processors, and lots of screen size. So now we're at, basically with the laptops, we're at full desktop size, so we don't have to stack everything on top of each other any longer, and now we can have this overly complicated layout from our wireframe. We can include the sidebar, we can include all the widgets everywhere. You can put all that stuff in there. Remember, oh no, I didn't get to that part yet, but let's try not to have it too overcomplicated, because the next step is keep it simple, stupid, right? Don't make your website overcomplicated. So this example right here is maybe a little too complicated, a little too much going on. It probably looks like a news website where we have kind of our standard header with a menu. There's not too much going on there. And then maybe we have our feature of the day with maybe there's 4 of them here, and then some more featured content right here perhaps, and then some sort of advertising tagline here, some featured products right here, or maybe some secondary news or some categorized news elements here. Maybe this is some today's news right here, if this were a news website, and then we have the footer down here. That's a lot going on. For somebody who is new to your particular website, maybe it's their first time coming to this website and they see all this, they're going to have information overload. Right? They're going to see all that. They're not going to know what is what. It's going to take them a moment just to digest everything that they've got going on that page. And they might never come back. They might go, wow, there's that. I don't even like that website. Right? It's got too much going on. It's, I don't like it. So don't cause information overload to your end users. Keep it simple, and the keep it simple, stupid phrase is not only for end users but also for the internal administrative users as well. So if you're building, maybe you're using a CMS like WordPress or Drupal or something, you might think, well, everything that's taken care of by the CMS, so I don't have to worry about it too much. Well, you would be wrong. You have to keep it. You have to keep it organized. You have to put that stuff into context. Build it in the right way that the internal administrators, they're not necessarily going to be web experts. And if you make, let's say, this featured news area, if they're supposed to be updating the content on a weekly basis and they have featured news to update in there, if it takes 15 steps for them to get that news in there, because first they have to put the article in, and then they have to upload an image for the main slider that's right there, right? They have to make sure that the image is the right dimensions. They have to crop the image. They have to provide an alternative size image for mobile and desktop. They have to put in a tagline for for that. They have to give it the right category. Maybe the way that your slider is, you have to create a secondary post just for the slider and then have a redirector point the secondary post to the primary post in the event that somebody actually clicks on it. That's a lot of steps, and that's not even part of the design. That's part of the back-end design that's potentially part of the CMS, because you've got a handful of plugins that are all cobbled together. Right? Try to keep that as simple as possible so that you're the developer. Of course, you're going to be able to use it, but other people need to be able to use it as well. So try and keep that part as simple as you can. Another way that things get unsimplified, things get complicated, is the complicated menus. So sometimes you'll get to a website that has more than one menu, and in those more than one menus, there will be links to some pages, but the links to the contact page is in menu B, not in menu A. So a person's looking for the contact page, they look through menu A, it's not there. Maybe they don't even know that menu B exists. Maybe it looks to them like it's a button. It doesn't look like it's a menu because it's lower in the page. We'll have a look. Maybe this is menu A, and maybe menu B is down here, or maybe this is a menu, or whatever the case is. Use your imagination on this design. So maybe they don't even see that secondary menu. They can't find the page. They just don't know where it is. If it's a contact that they're looking for, like my example, then probably the next place they're going to look is down in the footer. And they'd be right to look down there for the contact, but they could be looking for anything. Make your menus a little bit easier to navigate. Don't separate things out into two distinct menus and put some things in menu A and some things in menu B. Especially for phones, you want to have one master menu on a phone. So people are very familiar with it. I'm sure you are. You tap on the menu, it expands, it takes up the entire screen real estate, and you tap on items and they expand to show the children items in the menu. Use that on the mobile, and then either duplicate that or translate it into the desktop version. Your choice, either way, but have one giant master menu that has everything, hopefully, if you can, well organized, categorized, alphabetized. Put that in the master menu. And then if you want to have things in the footer, have another menu in there that has contact information, hours, location, the general information that goes in the footer. Put that in the footer, but also put it in the main menu. Right? Don't overcomplicate the menu by making people look in only one place. For if you have two menus, duplicate them. Right? And then another note that I have in here, unless you absolutely have to for some reason, don't have pages that cannot be found unless you first navigate to some other page on the website. So some example of where you have to do this, if your website is siloed out, is separated into totally different areas, they may even look totally different, and then each area has its own menu. Of course, that is perfectly fine, but if it's a website that doesn't have that, if it's an otherwise normal website, don't have, if you want to find the news categories, you have to click on news and then click on categories and then pick your category. That's a terrible plan. Why not? In the menu, you click on news and then you click on your categories. And you can go directly there in one click on the menu and then one click to go. You should, there's an old rule of thumb, and it still holds pretty true, is that an ideal number of clicks in a navigation should be that you can get from anywhere on your website to anywhere else on your website in 3 clicks or less. Now, that is not a universal hard and fast rule, but it is a pretty good rule of thumb that in 3 clicks you should be able to get to anywhere from anywhere. And if you had this master menu, like in the mobile, you click once to open the menu, one more time to open a submenu that's in there, and a third time to actually go to the page. 3 clicks and you're there. If the menu has 2, 3, 4 different levels into the menu, because it's a giant monolithic website, obviously there's no getting around that, but then you probably have a link to most every page that's in there, and you'll be fine. Also, don't forget to put a search, okay? You probably weren't going to forget that, but that helps with being able to find everything in a small number of clicks. Excuse me. Okay, now that we've talked all about that design, let's move on to accessibility. So I have a link here. Takes you directly to the World Wide Web Consortium Accessibility Standards Guideline. If you're doing a website for any government website, you're going to have to follow most of these rules. It's absolutely a necessity for any government entity to be fully accessible. If you're building a website for a client that is in any way accepted money from a government grant, same rules apply. And if you don't want to alienate between 5 and 50% of your potential audience, you should follow these accessibility rules as well. And I only have a few of the more common ones here. You can visit the World Wide Web Consortium and read the entire documentation if you like. I do recommend it. It's very useful information in there. There's nothing in there that is useless, of course. But I'm going to go over some of the highlights, some of the more common things and pitfalls here. And first and foremost, I'm going to talk about images and their alternate text, alt text for images. All right, I've not required this in classes yet. I'm not requiring any of the accessibility issues in classes in any of the assignments, because that's not, accessibility is not what the assignments are about. However, you do need to know what these are. So I have a little JS Fiddle that you can have a look at and see what we've got going on here with the alt text for an image. We can load this up, and here I have an image with some alt text, and I said that the image is going to be smiley.gif, and of course smiley.gif does not exist on JS Fiddle, right? I've not put it there. It doesn't exist if I haven't put it there. So when the page loads up, I get this broken image icon, and then I get my alt text smiley face graphic. Okay. So that's all that the alt text is. It's very useful for any reason your image doesn't load it to the page like it should, and there could be a lot of reasons. You could have primary and secondary server. Maybe all your media is served by a secondary server, and that server went down, so all your media is gone. Maybe you have an HTTPS problem and images aren't loading properly, or maybe there's just a text error. There's somebody made a typo in the image when they programmed that URL, and the image didn't load. Any number of reasons for an image not to be loaded, and the alt text will show, it will display. And this is not even for This is for everybody. This is not just for anybody with any kind of visual disability, but it absolutely works for them as well. So if somebody is a blind or visually impaired user, they're going to be using a screen reader, and the screen reader reads all the text. And when they get to images, the screen reader doesn't read the image. It does read the alt text, though. So the alt text should tell just what the image is. Doesn't have to be some lengthy visual description. Very short is fine. So quick do's and don'ts. Do be descriptive. It does not need to be a complete sentence. It should be, it should make sense. It should be a complete thought, not necessarily a complete sentence though. And do leave the alt text blank if the image is just a decorative image. So you have this image on your website that's just to make it look nice. Maybe it's some abstract thing, or maybe it's it's a photo of a puppy or something, but it's not needed for the content that's on there. It just looks nice. Don't put an alt text in there. And then somebody's using a screen reader, it's not going to read it, and so they're fine. It's all right to leave it blank in that case. And if it doesn't load for some reason, it was just decoration anyway, so it'll be fine if it doesn't load. Things that you should not do. Absolutely do not fill your alt text with keywords. For one, you're not fooling the Google bots. Google bots are smarter than that. They're programmed by some pretty smart humans, and it's not going to work. Worst case scenario is Google blacklists you for doing some sort of nefarious keyword trick that they figured out anyway. So don't fill your alt text with keywords. Don't use uncommon language in your keywords. The purpose of not the keywords, in your alt text. Don't use uncommon language in your alt text. The purpose of the alt text is to be descriptive. So if you're using some new hip word or some old hip word, it's not going to be as descriptive as if you just use common language in there. So don't do that. And then lastly, don't just leave it blank if it's an important picture. Maybe you have a chart as an image, and next to the chart is all the text that describes what's in the chart. And if the chart doesn't load, your alt text should say chart showing XYZ, chart showing the flattening the curve thing that's really popular these days. So just, if it's a chart, say it's a chart and then say what it shows. If you're doing a pet store and it's a picture of a particular puppy that is adoptable, say the puppy's name and is adoptable, maybe the age, maybe some key information right there. Keep it short, and that will make sure that it fits in that box. Don't write a whole paragraph because that's going to be larger than the original image was anyway. But keep that simple as well. All right, here's that keep it simple stupid again. Excuse me. Yeah, so do that and don't do that. Very good. Next accessibility issue is for those folks who are colorblind. Right? If you're not colorblind, you don't know anybody who's colorblind, you're probably not familiar with which colors make a good comparison, which colors make a bad comparison when they're next to each other. So I've downloaded and made a copy of this cool chart. Here's the link for it here. If you're not sure what to do, just look at this chart and don't use those color combinations. So probably maybe pink and blue here is maybe one of the more common ones that would be used together. And you can't use those particular shades of pink and blue, or else somebody with that type of colorblindness, and no, I'm not even going to try to pronounce those types, right? But somebody with that particular type of colorblindness is not going to be able to see those two shades compared with each other. Or maybe it's this shade and this shade, this shade and this shade. And the same thing over here, maybe orange and brown, maybe it's a fall theme. That's not going to work out so well with that particular type of colorblindness. If it's a picture, that's totally fine, but if it's one color is a background color and the other color is the text, to the colorblind person, they're not going to see the text. Okay? And you might be thinking, well, not that many people are colorblind. Well, I looked it up for you, and it's about 5% of the population. So you're right, it's not that many people, but this is just one of the accessibility issues, and people who are colorblind are not necessarily going to have any of these other accessibility issues going on, so they just add up to each other, and you want to account for all of them. Also, I think from this same website, they did some math and they figured out for my average size classrooms, which range about 10 or 15 people, there's a 50-50 or better than 50-50 chance that I will have at least one colorblind person in all of my average size classrooms. Not this size classroom, not very many people, but in my average size classroom, I have a 50% chance of getting at least one colorblind student. It'd be nice if I did, so they could tell me which colors and how realistic these colors are. I'm sure that I can trust these colors because of the source that I got it from, but I would like a first-hand opinion by a person standing right in front of me. That would be cool. But some do's and don'ts about color combinations. Do just use high contrasting colors, so a dark background and light text, or a light background and dark text, regardless of the color. Do use colors that are on opposite ends of the color wheel. If you don't have a color wheel, you're not a designer, that's okay. You're probably not the one making the color choices then, though. But use colors that are at the opposite end. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. Start, like we did in all the way back here in our layouts, start with a grayscale. If you can read it in a grayscale, there's a fair enough chance that you'll still be able to read it with one of these others, regardless of the color, because the grayscale is obviously irregardless of color. As long as the contrast is strong enough, you're probably still okay. That's a great rule of thumb for a do. And the last do, I suppose, is for text, just always use black or white, and then the background colors, so long as you're doing that high contrast with light and dark, the background colors could be any color at that point. And then don't, like I mentioned, don't use any of these color combinations down here, and also don't just finally remember about colorblind people after you've chosen your colors and now you're forced to kind of back into some color changes. Don't do that. Okay, this one should be the easiest as long as you remember to do it before you pick your colors. Okay. Next in accessibility is buttons, specifically on mobile screen sizes. Make sure your buttons are as big as a fingertip. Buttons get really hard to press when they're smaller than your fingertip. You're going to bring the phone closer to your face, and you're going to really carefully zero in your finger and target that button and press that button. And the phone is getting very, very good, very, very smart at figuring out exactly what button you were trying to press, even if there's two tiny buttons next to each other. But it's not 100%, and it still forces you to bring that phone closer to your face and very carefully press a button when people shouldn't have to do that. the designers, the developers should just know, hey, buttons need to be fingertip size or bigger, and just do that, right? That's a very simple thing to do. But if you didn't do our mobile first design, if you did the desktop first and then you squished it down into mobile size, you might have squished down your buttons, and so they're not gonna be fingertip size anymore. They're going to be smaller than fingertip size, and you're going to have a problem with that. So make sure that your buttons are large enough, not only to actually press with your fingertip, but make sure that the font is large enough to read on all screen sizes. When you're changing between screen sizes and you're programming, depending on whether you should have started from mobile first and get larger, but if you happen to start larger and get smaller, you may have to adjust your font sizes between the screen sizes. Okay, so don't forget to do that. And then finally, I'm getting to my last slide here, resized text. Desktop screens, most notably, some folks don't like the default text size on their screen. Maybe they have a really big screen and the default text size is very small. So they will zoom in on that web page. They may zoom in all the time. They always have their browser zoomed in. If you've not done this before, you press Control plus on your screen and it zooms in. You see I'm doing it a couple of times here, and press Control 0 to go back to the default. So you can zoom in and out with Control plus or minus, and Control 0 zooms in and out. Control and a mouse wheel does the same thing as well. But some people want their web pages zoomed in, 1 or 2 clicks. If somebody's zooming in more than 1 or 2 clicks, you can't account for everybody, but you should zoom your pages in and out 1 or 2 clicks and make sure that they still work. So the second example I have right here, it's been zoomed in, the text is really large, and now it doesn't fit. It overlaps. There's overflow in these boxes, and the text is sticking out and going over the other box. People who zoom often probably are getting kind of used to this, especially if they're big zoomers and they're zooming more than 1 or 2 clicks. But you should be zooming in and out 1 or 2 clicks before you're settled on the design of your site, before you're settled on specifically on font sizes. All the other boxes and layout things should, if they're developed right, if they're built right, they should scale accordingly. But it's the font size in particular that may go outside of the box or create a scroll bar or just be cut off. You'll want to test that out. So that's the end of this slideshow. I don't have any assignment for you this week. Next week is, of course, spring break. Have a great spring break if you can. Don't go anywhere and make people sick, but try and enjoy yourselves otherwise. Hopefully you have plenty of time to catch up on all your assignments and maybe even do some light reading. And I will have some more videos here waiting for you when you get back. All right. Enjoy next week.